Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello Scott.
Josh, my friend, I see Cyberpunk 2077 things all over the place, and as it is a bit of a slow news day, I kind of just thought we'd have a bit of a discussion on where that game is at right now. Now, this is the most me thing ever, and I don't mean to not be completely positive on it, because I wish I was more excited for Cyberpunk 2077 than I am. And, you know, having seen all the footage that's out there, the gameplay clips, the interviews and everything else, I have seen a little contingent of people just saying like, oh, I don't know if the gameplay side of it is as good as, you know, the art direction, the world building, you know, the character models, etc. And I kind of want to talk about that because the more I delve into the gameplay side, the more, and I'm just being totally honest, it wouldn't be me if I wasn't being totally honest.
Of course.
The more I look at the gameplay, the more I kind of go, oh, I don't know. And I don't know if they're going to nail it. And the more I look at the stealth seems quite basic. It's just, sort of, you know, you're creeping around, take down, you can stash a body, that's cool. But a lot of the animations seem quite ropey. And as soon as I did see someone, I forget who it is, so I apologize, but I did see someone liken it to The Witcher 2. In terms of, you know, Witcher 2 is a very beloved game. It's obviously I still love The Witcher 2, but CDPR wouldn't nail that side of their design until The Witcher 3. And as they're shifting across from third-person action to first-person and all the different design changes that come with that, it feels like this already feels like something they're going to nail in the sequel, which I don't mean to just poo-poo all over the whole thing. But that wouldn't be me if I wasn't being honest. What do you think?
I have a lot of thoughts about this, Scott Hill. Because on the one hand, I think is a kind of blanket statement. You know, you mentioned there that the combat or the gameplay doesn't look as good as the art direction of the world or the characters and stuff like that. And to that, I will say it doesn't. But that's kind of what's to be expected, I think, of an RPG in this scale. Like, you know, we're going to talk about The Witcher 3, but when it comes to kind of like the major blockbuster action RPGs from the past decade or so, I would say each one, in every single case, the quests, the world, the NPCs, the dialogue have far outweighed the actual combat or the gameplay in terms of quality. You know, even like the very best ones like The Witcher 3 and Fallout 4, for instance, the gameplay is solid, but if you stacked it up against any other kind of straightforward action game in their respective genres, I would say, personally, that it wouldn't hold up to the same level. Like, in my opinion, like those games have spectacular combat because it's in an RPG. If that was in a kind of, if it was only sold on that element, it wouldn't be as strong. So in that sense, I agree in that Cyberpunk's gameplay occasionally looks a little ropey, occasionally looks a bit basic from what we've seen. It's kind of very much by the numbers, but for an RPG of kind of like this scale and ambition, I think it's far, or at least to me, it looks far more refined and far more fluid than what I personally expected. And I think the Witcher 2 comparison particularly is maybe a little harsh, because Witcher 2 I do think has kind of plenty of problems with its gameplay and its combat. Like the backstabs in that game just absolutely annihilate you. The signs aren't great to use. The potions aren't great to use. But I don't think The Witcher 3 is kind of like that much of a step up. It is a step up, but it's not like, you know, for me, I don't play The Witcher 3 for the combat. The combat's good and the combat's serviceable, but it's something that I kind of occasionally have to get through to get to the quests and get to the missions.
Yeah, I do want to totally point out that I'm not part of the, oh my god, it's why isn't this GTA in a future city brigade? Because that's not at all, you know, all of the stuff that I'm saying skews towards positivity. I'm only really talking about degrees of refinement. Like, yeah, the whole thing, the Witcher 2 to Witcher 3 comparison, for me, like that is a big enough step up where I still totally love Witcher 3's combat, but it is a refinement from 2, and so I think that was the sort of point, or at least that's what the point I would make between 2 and 3 as a comparison to Cyberpunk, that all the things they're laying down now, I think, will be refined to the point where they're genuinely great going forward. But that, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You want to go into this knowing that it's an RPG, knowing that it's this immersive experience, and the combat and the gameplay side of it, the more sort of fast-moving side of it, is just kind of on the side, and that's fine. But that stuff was kind of distracting. I mean, another massive point as well is that a lot of the script, the dialogue, the new V voice actor is quite notably bad. Like, there's two male voice actors, two female voice actors that you can choose between, and the new one that they had is sort of this like Jersey Shore, New York kind of guy, and they're going for this sort of like kind of cheesy, self-aware 80s tone. I mean, it's all in the prologue, so it could totally change, but the one that they had a couple of years ago when they showed off the other build seemed to be received a lot more warmly. I don't want to just like hand wave away all your really good points about balancing and why you go to the RPG. And yeah, it's true that you shouldn't buy this for the action and stuff like that. But if we're rolling together a general feeling of not everything lining up, there's just some bits that really stick out to me. Where did you come down on the voice side of it, the script side of it?
No, I do totally agree with you on that front, to be fair. I think, like you said, it's more than fair to look at this kind of complete package and point out the things that don't look quite as refined as, the stuff of high quality. As you expect, I think, the kind of double-edged sword of making a really good game is that the parts that are almost perfect make the slightly weaker parts look even worse in comparison, because the bar is so high that anything below the perfection that you've established looks kind of much wonkier than it probably would have been had the bar been a bit lower. But when it comes to the kind of like the dialogue and the voice acting, that was kind of the first thing that took me a bit by surprise, actually. Like you said, the at least the male voice for V, I don't know if we got a taste of the female voice, but the male voice I did think kind of felt like almost like a broad caricature, and it wasn't helped by the dialogue, which, like you said, I think you described it was almost like Saints Row-esque or something, you know what I mean? Very tongue-in-cheek, very kind of purposefully video gamey, which is what I didn't really expect. And I don't like using video gamey as kind of like a pejorative to put something down, but it did feel like, when we had that kind of batch of edgy, quirky video games that like the early 2010s, 2013 and stuff, that were trying to be purposefully kind of like button pushy and jokey and irreverent and erratic and stuff like that. And I think that kind of, at least initially, like you said, has this kind of similar vibe where it's not as naturalistic as I expected. But to be fair, going back to The Witcher, playing The Witcher 3 this year, I kind of noticed that there as well. It's just hidden there because you're in this completely different time period where you kind of expect the dialogue to be a bit clunky. I did notice it going back that a lot of the jokes and kind of like the forced kind of like mature banter between some of the people got a bit old faster than it did when I first played it.
I tell you what, when I cited Saints Row, I don't necessarily cite that as a negative. I adore Saints Row 3. I know that's sort of the one that really divides people, but I totally love the direction Saints went with. But the thing with that, though, is that with Cyberpunk, watching this new footage and the new trailer and the new gameplay snippets and everything, I sort of had to kind of pivot my tonal expectations because I feel like they're sort of building, the archetypal, it'll be referred to as the archetypal Cyberpunk game, because we've not really had something in Cyberpunk fiction to this level, this scale, this scope before. I kind of feel like they're building this like wide swath, this sort of like it's not a new genre by any means, but I think that they're doing this sort of the terms that I go to are like boilerplate or something like that. It's like they're skewing for the biggest audience possible, the biggest introduction to cyberpunk fiction. And if you've read Cyberpunk 2020, the book, there's a lot of quote-unquote cringe dialogue in there. There's a lot of things that are baked into cyberpunk fiction that are sort of like faux edgelord by way of 80s style references and, lots of customary nouns and nomenclature and stuff like that. And it was kind of like that, but it's not until you hear it through the guise of someone like the new V voice actor where it's like, oh, maybe this is a bit too cringe and it's not landing the right way and things like that. But I mean, even to that regard, a lot of critics said that, since they played it a couple of years ago versus now, it's even more palatable now, which is kind of funny because the version that we had now is the one that stood out more. The one a couple of years ago, from what they showed to the public, seemed to go down better. But yeah, in terms of like tonal stuff, do you expect like almost a wacky thing, like this big sort of, it's not a swashbuckling tale, but like an anything goes kind of thing, or something more serious in terms of like the transhumanist aspects and, taking body mods and like this gritty underbelly and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think this might be kind of more of a me problem than a game problem, but from the footage that we'd seen, previously, I kind of expected something a bit more serious, so that kind of did take me by surprise. But at the same time, like you said, like the aesthetic it's going for, like you said, it's very kind of like, it's very broad, like you said, it's trying to get everyone in. And I mean, this is a game where you can choose, 5 different pubic hair options, and that's going to be a big deal. So Finally, you know what I mean? So it's not like these things weren't already baked in there. I do think it's just kind of a combination of the writing and the voice acting. I think if this was just kind of like an RPG like Fallout New Vegas where you didn't have a voice protagonist and you just saw these lines written down, they might be a bit more palatable. I think it's combined with kind of like the delivery of them, which kind of it's almost presenting them unironically, which I think does the writing kind of a disservice, because it does feel kind of very tongue-in-cheek, but it's almost kind of, I don't know, there's something missing there, at least from me, from what we've seen. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of like expositional stuff. Obviously, it's the prologue, and it is a fine line to walk on a narrative side. You don't just want characters espousing things that the other person would already know. It's always that sort of telltale thing of just sort of like, oh, it's such and such. Remember the person that killed your mum 10 years ago? Like stuff like that. And they're not that bad, but if you go back through those gameplay clips, like I said, maybe because it's a prologue, there's a lot of expository stuff between V and Jackie that sort of like stands out. But yeah, the main like talking point for me is the gameplay side of it. And I totally give CDPR like, you know, so much space to experiment in terms of they're shifting. It's their first person shooter. It's their first person game ever. It's a first. And so I give them a lot of leeway with that. But at the same time, you know, they're coming from Witcher 3, they're coming from this sort of, it's been in development for 8 years. Like, you kind of expect a little bit more, like, to match up.
Yeah, no, I do agree, and I think, you know, obviously, like I said, like the criticisms or the worries are absolutely kind of justified, but for me, looking at the space the game is kind of playing around in and looking at its closest contemporaries, for me, the closest contemporary is probably not actually The Witcher 3, it's probably Deus Ex.
Yes.
Mankind Divided, was that the most recent one? Yes. Yeah. Mankind Divided.
2016.
Which is a game that I actually really loved, and I thought Square Enix and Eidos Montreal, I think it was Eidos Montreal, did a really good job with that. But even if you look at that kind of title from a gameplay-orientated perspective, like, it's not amazing. It has a lot of the core tenets that this does. It has hacking, it has stealth, it has straight-up firefights, and yet that looked far clunkier than what Cyberpunk has to offer. Like, that game couldn't even get like the transitions between stealth kills right. Like, it would actually cut to black very briefly and then show you a third-person perspective of Aiden, I think he was called, like killing a folk.
Sorry, the thing with that comparison, though, that totally brings it full circle, because I thought that was the most disappointing game of the year. So, like, more so because of the business practices that went into it alongside that, and also because of the way the story was paced and whatever. I thought it ended way too soon, and they didn't flesh enough stuff out. But that's a great comparison, because if I can also throw another Cyberpunk game in, which I mentioned in our other video we did, 2013's Syndicate, that game has immaculate combat. I know it's coming from a dev team that specialize in it, but that's the thing. It's like, can we not have both? Can we not have amazing world building? And, you know, they're trying to make this benchmark, this milestone in cyberpunk fiction.
No,
and I just feel like, you know, if the gameplay side's not going to be up there with the world building, the characters and everything else, then that's going to be a big negative, and it's going to stand out even more if everything else was so on point.
No, it's very true, and I feel like we're all always pushing towards this world where we have these, you know, major RPGs with combat that are as good, that is as good as any of the other elements. And I do think we're making like big strides towards that. If you look at like 10 years ago or something, when we had Fallout 3 coming out, and the disparity between the world and the quest compared to that game's combat, which was absolutely dog, and I'll have no one tell me otherwise, it was terrible. I feel like we've made huge strides since then, and for me, even though there is some clunkiness to Cyberpunk's gameplay that we've seen so far, it looks more fluid and more impactful than what I personally expected. A lot of people won't expect the same things that I do, but when I'm looking at the wider genre and the other games I've played, it genuinely to me looks like a step up. It's obviously not as good as, you know, a Syndicate or action-focused titles, but I don't know, man. Like,
you don't need it to be.
I don't need it to be currently. I would love it. I would love to have a world where, you know, it is as good as the best first-person shooters out there and the best hacking game out there. We get this lovely world on top of it. But I just think, you know, industry-wide, I don't think we're quite there yet, and that might be a bit too much that we're asking for, perhaps.
Yeah, and that's the thing. My overall point is not that it should be as good as a Titanfall or, you know, a Call of Duty or Destiny or whatever. It's more that the gameplay stood out so much that it made me want to talk about it this way, because I don't. They're not dropping the ball. I haven't even played it, but I think that like it just stood out as something that was a bit of a negative, and I have seen that backed up a little bit online. So I think I just want to have that conversation. Like, let us know what you think down in the comments below. Where are you on Cyberpunk overall? Is it just all out hype? Oh my god, it's perfect. It's a dream come true. Or are there some sort of small things that are sticking out that are worth talking about? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.